The story begins with a warm, lively scene in the Harris household. Clara is cooking dinner in their small, slightly run-down apartment. James, her husband, plays with their 5-year-old daughter, Ellie, while they laugh over a silly game. Their love is evident, even in the midst of the cracks in their ceiling and a leaky faucet James has been meaning to fix. James briefly mentions his frustration with their landlord, Mr. Blake. Blake doesn't want to fix anything in this place. He's charging us more, and we're living with mold, he says, his tone tense. Clara reassures him, saying, "We'll get through this like we always do." The idyllic moment is interrupted by a phone call James takes, stepping outside to talk. His tone is sharp, but he brushes off Clara's concerns when he returns. "Just work stuff," he says with a reassuring smile. The next evening, the family's world is upended when James doesn't come home. Clara calls his phone repeatedly, her anxiety growing by the hour. The knock on the door that night feels like a punch to her gut. When Clara opens the door, she finds 2 police officers standing there. Their blunt delivery of the news, James has been found dead in the woods behind their apartment complex, leaves her reeling. Ellie, sensing her mother's distress, clings to her, crying, while Clara collapses, trying to process the unthinkable. The following days are a haze of grief and unanswered questions. Clara struggles to keep herself together for Ellie, who doesn't fully understand why her father isn't coming back. James's funeral is small, attended by family and a few neighbors who offer their condolences. At night, when Ellie is asleep, Clara goes over the details the police gave her. James was beaten to death, and they believe it was a robbery gone wrong. But something doesn't sit right with Clara. James's wallet was still on him, untouched. Why would a robber leave the money? Clara recalls the arguments James had with Mr. Blake, their landlord. He'd been fighting with Blake over repairs and a sudden rent increase. She remembers James saying, "Blake threatened me today. Told me I'd regret it if I didn't drop this." Driven by suspicion, Clara starts searching through James's belongings. She finds his journal, tucked away in a drawer. Her hands tremble as she reads the last entry. "Blake said I was pushing too hard. He told me he'd make sure my family paid if I didn't back off." Clara takes the journal to the police, but they dismiss it. "It's circumstantial," one officer says, barely looking at the pages. Infuriated, Clara realizes she'll have to find the answers herself. She starts talking to neighbors, gathering their stories about Blake. She learns he has a long history of harassing tenants, particularly families of color. One tenant tells her about being evicted after asking for basic repairs. An older man, Mr. Jones, mentions seeing James and Blake arguing in the parking lot the day before James disappeared. Clara's determination intensifies, but so do the threats. One night, she hears someone outside her window. When she looks, she finds her car tire slashed. Another time, a brick is thrown through her window with a note, "Stop digging." Terrified but resolute, Clara knows she's on the right track. She reaches out to Lisa, a local journalist known for exposing corruption. Lisa agrees to help Clara investigate Blake. Together, they uncover a troubling history: lawsuits for racial discrimination, tenant complaints about illegal evictions, and even accusations of violence. The breakthrough comes when a neighbor reluctantly shares security camera footage. It's grainy, but it shows James and a man who matches Blake's build arguing in the parking lot the night James disappeared. Lisa enhances the footage and confirms it. Blake was the last person to see James alive. Clara takes the footage, the journal, and the testimonies she's gathered back to the police. This time, they reopen the case. Blake is brought in for questioning, and under pressure, he confesses. In a flashback, we see the events as Blake describes them. James confronted him in the parking lot about the rent hikes and unsafe conditions in the building. Blake, feeling cornered, lashed out, hitting James in a fit of rage. Panicking, he dumped James's body in the woods, assuming no one would link him to the crime. The confession leads to Blake's arrest, but the battle isn't over. The trial becomes a grueling ordeal for Clara. Blake's defense team tries to smear James's character, suggesting he was aggressive and unstable. Clara takes the stand, her voice trembling but steady as she recounts the events leading up to James's death. Lisa's investigative reports, coupled with the security footage and Blake's confession, paint a damning picture. The jury finds Blake guilty of second-degree murder, and he is sentenced to prison. With Blake behind bars, Clara and Ellie move out of the apartment to start fresh. They settle into a new home where Ellie feels safe again. Clara channels her grief into activism, joining housing justice organizations to fight against systemic racism in housing. In a heartfelt moment, Clara visits James's grave with Ellie. She places flowers on his headstone and whispers, "We did it, James. We got justice." Ellie looks up at her and asks, "Is Daddy proud of us?" Clara smiles through her tears. "He is, baby. He's so proud." The story ends with Clara speaking at a community rally, sharing her story and urging others to stand up against injustice. The camera pans over the crowd as they cheer, inspired by her courage and determination. This story reminds us that justice isn't just about one family, it's about all of us standing together against injustice. If this moved you, share it, start a conversation, and let's work toward a world where everyone feels safe in their own home. Have you or someone you know faced challenges like Clara's? Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters, and together, we can bring light to these important issues.